Imagine this. You're standing in a crowded square, watching thousands of people move in perfect synchronization, not because they've been commanded to, but because they genuinely believe they're thinking for themselves. Each person is convinced they've arrived at their opinions through careful deliberation, through reason, through their own unique intelligence. Yet if you could see from above, you'd witness something terrifying. They're all moving in the exact same direction, thinking the exact same thoughts, feeling the exact same emotions, as if controlled by an invisible puppeteer. Before we begin this journey into the darkest corners of human consciousness, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. What you're about to discover will shatter your most fundamental assumptions about your own mind, and you'll want to be part of this community when that happens. Like this video if you're ready to confront uncomfortable truths and share it with someone who believes they think independently. Trust me, by the end of this, we'll all realize how dangerously wrong we've been about ourselves. Now imagine something even more unsettling. You're one of them. This is not a scene from a dystopian novel. This is your daily reality. Right now, as you read these words, you believe you're exercising independent thought. You believe the opinions you hold, the values you cherish, the worldview that shapes your every decision you believe. These are yours. But what if I told you that Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimistic philosopher, discovered something so disturbing about human nature that it challenges the very foundation of individual consciousness itself? What if everything you think you know about your own mind is an elaborate self-deception? Schopenhauer called it the herd mind, not merely the tendency to follow crowds, but something far more insidious. He revealed that what we mistake for rational thought is often nothing more than the unconscious absorption of collective delusions. The voice in your head that you consider your own inner wisdom? It's speaking in borrowed words, thinking borrowed thoughts, reaching borrowed conclusions. Consider this paradox. In an age where we have unprecedented access to information, unlimited educational resources, and infinite perspectives at our fingertips, why do entire populations think with such remarkable uniformity? Why do millions of people, each believing themselves to be independent thinkers, arrive at nearly identical conclusions about complex issues they've barely examined? Why does a person who prides themselves on their rationality become viscerally angry when encountering ideas that challenge their deepest assumptions they can't even remember consciously adopting? The answer lies in a truth so uncomfortable that most people will refuse to acknowledge it, even when presented with overwhelming evidence. Human beings are not the rational individuals they believe themselves to be. Instead, we are creatures whose minds have been colonized by forces we neither recognize nor understand. Our thoughts are not our own. Our reasoning is not our own. Even our emotions, those feelings we consider most intimately personal, are not our own. Schopenhauer understood that this is not merely a philosophical curiosity. This is a crisis of human consciousness itself. When the herd mind takes control, it doesn't just influence our opinions, it fundamentally rewires our capacity to think. It transforms potential philosophers into mere echoing chambers. It turns what should be vibrant, questioning minds into passive receivers of prepackaged ideas. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The herd mind doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a uniform or wave a flag. Instead, it disguises itself as your own authentic voice. It makes you feel intelligent, informed, and righteously confident in your beliefs. It provides you with sophisticated-sounding reasons for conclusions you never actually reasoned your way to. It gives you the illusion of understanding while ensuring you never truly understand anything. You might be thinking, but surely this doesn't apply to me. I question things. I think for myself. I've changed my mind about important issues. And that's exactly what everyone in the crowd believes. That's exactly what the herd mind wants you to think. The question that will haunt you as we journey deeper into Schopenhauer's devastating insights is this. If the herd mind is invisible to those under its influence, if it perfectly mimics the voice of authentic reasoning, if it provides convincing evidence for its conclusions and sophisticated justifications for its beliefs, then how would you even know if you've fallen under its spell? How do you think for yourself when you can't trust your own thoughts? The answer to why we can't trust our own thoughts lies buried in a truth so disturbing that most people will spend their entire lives running from it. You are not the author of your own mind. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this in the 19th century, long before modern psychology confirmed his darkest suspicions about human nature. He recognized that what we mistake for individual reasoning is actually something far more primitive and terrifying, the expression of what he called the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all of existence. But when this will expresses itself through the masses, through the collective, it becomes exponentially more dangerous. Think about this. Every morning, you wake up believing you're going to think your own thoughts. You scroll through news, form opinions, make decisions, and feel confident that your mind is operating independently. But Schopenhauer saw through this illusion. He realized that the human mind, when left to its own devices, doesn't think, it imitates. It doesn't reason, it absorbs. It doesn't create, it echoes. The psychological mechanisms behind this are both elegant and horrifying. Our brains evolved not for truth, but for survival. Your ancestors who questioned the tribe's consensus too often didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. Those who conformed, who absorbed the group's beliefs without resistance, who felt physical discomfort, when standing alone they survived, they reproduced, and they passed down to you a neural architecture that prioritizes belonging over truth. This is why independent thought feels so unnatural, so exhausting, so frightening. Your brain is literally wired to resist it. When you encounter an idea that conflicts with your group's consensus, you don't just disagree intellectually, you experience a kind of existential terror. Your nervous system activates the same alarm bells that once warned your ancestors of physical danger. To think differently isn't just difficult, it feels like dying. But here's where Schopenhauer's insight becomes truly profound. He understood that this biological programming doesn't just influence our opinions, it colonizes our entire sense of self. The voice in your head that you consider you is actually a composite of every authority, figure, peer group, cultural narrative, and social expectation you've ever encountered. What you call your personality is largely a collection of borrowed traits. What you call your values are inherited scripts. What you call your dreams are often just variations on collectively approved themes. Friedrich Nietzsche, deeply influenced by Schopenhauer, saw this clearly when he wrote about the death of God. He wasn't just talking about religion, but about the collapse of any external authority that could tell us who to be. Without these external structures, most people don't discover their authentic selves. They panic and frantically search for new herds to join, new authorities to follow, new scripts to download. Carl Jung understood the same mechanism when he wrote about the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of shared symbols, archetypes, and patterns that shape our thoughts without our awareness. But Jung was more optimistic than Schopenhauer. He believed we could integrate these collective influences consciously, that we could become aware of how the herd operates within us and thereby gain some measure of freedom from its control. The tragedy is that most people never even attempt this integration. They live their entire lives as unconscious vessels for collective content, never realizing that their most cherished beliefs, their deepest fears, their strongest desires are not actually theirs. They are downloads from the cultural matrix, installations from the herd's operating system. This is why Schopenhauer was so pessimistic about human potential. He saw that the vast majority of people will never think an original thought, never question a fundamental assumption, never risk the terrifying freedom of standing alone with their own reason. They will live and die as echoes, convinced they were voices. But for those rare individuals willing to confront this reality, willing to endure the psychological violence of stepping outside the herd's warm embrace, something extraordinary becomes possible. They begin to hear their own voice, perhaps for the first time in their lives. And in that voice lies not just the possibility of authentic thought, but the seed of genuine human freedom. The question that will haunt you as we continue is this: are you ready to discover who you actually are beneath all the layers of collective programming? Or will you retreat back into the comfortable prison of borrowed thoughts and inherited dreams? But the horror doesn't stop at borrowed thoughts. The consequences of the herd mind's dominion over human consciousness extend far beyond simple conformity. They reshape reality itself in ways so subtle and pervasive that we mistake them for natural laws. Consider this terrifying experiment that plays out millions of times every day. A student sits in a classroom. The teacher poses a difficult question. The majority confidently gives the wrong answer. The few who know the truth hesitate, look around, feel the crushing weight of social pressure. and many will either stay silent or actively conform to the false consensus. This isn't just theoretical psychologist. Solomon Asch proved in his famous experiments that individuals will literally claim to see something that isn't there simply because everyone else in the room agrees on the false perception. Think about what this means. The herd mind doesn't just influence our opinions, it can override our basic sensory perception of reality. Your eyes can show you one thing. Your reason can confirm it. But if the collective insists on a different version of truth, your mind will often capitulate. The herd doesn't just destroy reason. It colonizes your very relationship with reality. This is happening to you right now in ways you cannot see. Every social media platform you scroll through is conducting a real-time Asch experiment on your consciousness. Every news cycle, every trending topic, every viral opinion is testing whether you'll trust your own judgment or surrender to the digital herd's version of truth. And most of the time, without even realizing it, you're failing the test. The psychological trap runs deeper than Schopenhauer could have imagined, though he understood its fundamental mechanism perfectly. What he called the blind will, expressing itself through the masses, has now been amplified by technology into something unprecedented in human history. You carry in your pocket a device that connects you to billions of minds, all unconsciously coordinating their thoughts, all reinforcing the same patterns, all pulling you toward the same conclusions. René Girard discovered what he called mimetic desire. The realization that we don't desire things because of their inherent value, but because others desire them. This creates cascading waves of imitation that sweep through entire populations. You think you want that career, that lifestyle, that political position because you've reasoned your way to it, but the truth is more disturbing. You want it because the herd wants it, and the herd's desires have colonized your neural pathways so completely that you experience their wants as your own authentic longings. Watch how this plays out in real time. Social media trends aren't just entertainment, they're mass psychological experiments in synchronized thinking. Millions of people suddenly care deeply about issues they'd never heard of days before. They adopt moral positions with fierce conviction, argue passionately for causes they can barely explain, and feel genuine outrage about events they barely understand. Then, just as suddenly, the collective attention shifts, and yesterday's passionate conviction becomes today's forgotten irrelevance. But here's what makes this truly insidious. Each person involved believes they're thinking independently. They can provide reasons for their positions, explanations for their outrage, justifications for their sudden shifts in attention. The herd mind has become so sophisticated that it provides each individual with the illusion of autonomous reasoning while ensuring they all reach identical conclusions. The most devastating consequence is what happens to your capacity for deep, sustained thought. The herd mind operates on the principle of immediate consensus. Complex issues must be reduced to simple positions. Nuanced problems must be flattened into binary choices. And anything that requires prolonged reflection must be abandoned in favor of instant reactions. Your attention span, your ability to hold contradictory ideas in tension, your tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, all of these essential cognitive capacities atrophy when subjected to the herd's demand for quick, clear, collective responses. Schopenhauer warned that this collective stupefaction doesn't just affect individuals, it shapes entire civilizations. When the herd mind becomes dominant, societies lose their capacity for wisdom, for genuine moral reasoning, for the kind of deep cultural reflection that might actually solve their problems. Instead, they oscillate between mass enthusiasms and mass panics, chasing solutions that address symptoms while ignoring root causes, because the herd can only focus on whatever is immediate, obvious, and emotionally satisfying. The ultimate consequence is the death of the individual as a meaningful category of existence. Not physical death, but something worse, spiritual and intellectual death. The person continues to breathe, to move, to speak, but they are no longer truly alive in any sense that would have mattered to Schopenhauer. They have become a node in the herd's network, a processing unit in the collective's computational system, a vessel for borrowed thoughts and manufactured emotions. And the most terrifying part? This death feels like life. It feels meaningful, connected, purposeful. The herd provides its members with constant validation, shared identity, clear enemies, and simple answers. Who would choose the lonely, difficult path of authentic thought when the herd offers such comfortable alternatives? The question burning through all of this is, How do you escape a prison whose bars are made of your own thoughts? The answer begins with a revelation so counterintuitive, it will feel like betraying everything you've been taught about how to live. You must learn to embrace the terror of solitude. Schopenhauer himself lived this truth with an almost obsessive dedication. He spent much of his life in isolation, writing with relentless focus while being largely ignored by his contemporaries. He knew the price of standing apart, but he also knew its incalculable value. Solitude, he discovered, is not just the absence of others, it's the presence of yourself. It's the only space where you can hear the voice of authentic reason above the deafening chorus of collective opinion. But this is not the comfortable solitude of modern self-care culture, with its meditation apps and mindfulness retreats. This is something far more radical and dangerous, the deliberate choice to step away from the warming embrace of consensus reality and face the cold, harsh landscape of independent thought. It's the willingness to sit with ideas that make others uncomfortable, to pursue questions that have no socially acceptable answers, to arrive at conclusions that will isolate you from those you love. Think about what this means practically. When was the last time you spent an entire day, not an hour, not a morning, but a full day without consuming any external opinions? No news, no social media, no podcasts, no conversations about current events. Just you, your thoughts, and whatever questions emerge when the noise stops. Most people can't do this for even a few hours without experiencing something close to panic. The silence reveals how little of what they consider thinking is actually their own mental activity. Here's the first radical practice. Implement what I call belief quarantine. Take one strongly held conviction, something you're absolutely certain about, and force yourself to argue against it for 30 minutes. Not superficially, not as a game, but with genuine intellectual honesty. Try to find the strongest possible case for the opposite position. Most people will discover something shocking. They can't do it. They've never actually examined their beliefs deeply enough to understand what they're truly arguing for, let alone against. This reveals the second crucial insight. True intellectual freedom requires what Schopenhauer called the courage to be misunderstood. When you begin thinking authentically, your conclusions will often appear strange, even dangerous, to those around you. You may find yourself questioning sacred assumptions, challenging cherished narratives, or arriving at positions that can't be easily categorized as liberal or conservative, progressive or traditional. The herd mind operates through simple binaries. Authentic thought reveals the world's irreducible complexity. Friedrich Nietzsche, building on Schopenhauer's foundation, described this as becoming one who creates values rather than inherits them. But this is not the shallow individualism of consumer culture, where you express your uniqueness by choosing between pre-approved options. This is something far more profound. The terrifying responsibility of deciding for yourself what matters, what's true, what's worth living for. The historical examples are both inspiring and sobering. Galileo faced the Inquisition rather than deny what his observations revealed about the universe. Socrates chose death rather than abandon his commitment to questioning everything. More recently, whistleblowers have sacrificed careers, relationships, and security to expose truths the herd preferred to ignore. These weren't people seeking attention or trying to be different. They were individuals who found themselves unable to participate in collective self-deception. But rebellion against the herd mind isn't just about dramatic confrontations with authority. It's about the daily practice of intellectual honesty in small moments. It's asking yourself, do I actually believe this? Or am I just repeating what I've heard? It's noticing when your emotions are being manipulated by appeals to tribal identity. It's recognizing when you're about to share an opinion not because you've thought it through, but because sharing it will signal your membership in the right group. Here's a practical exercise that will revolutionize your relationship with your own thoughts. For 1 week, before expressing any opinion publicly, whether in conversation, on social media, or even in your own mind, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. How did I arrive at this belief? What evidence would change my mind? What am I afraid will happen if I'm wrong? Most people will discover they can't answer even one of these questions about their most cherished convictions. The path of intellectual rebellion also requires developing what Schopenhauer called inner strength, the psychological fortitude to endure disagreement, misunderstanding, and even ostracism without capitulating to the herd's demand for conformity. This isn't stubbornness or arrogance. It's the mature recognition that truth is not determined by popularity, that wisdom often appears as foolishness to the crowd, and that the price of authentic thought is the constant possibility of being wrong and having to change your mind. But here's the paradox that Schopenhauer understood. The person who develops the courage to stand alone with reason often discovers they're not as alone as they thought. Throughout history, there have always been others scattered, often unknown to each other, who chose truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. They form what we might call an invisible fellowship of independent minds, connected not by shared beliefs but by shared commitment to the difficult work of thinking. The rebellion begins the moment you realize that your mind belongs to you, not to the herd. It accelerates when you start treating your thoughts as hypotheses to be tested rather than possessions to be defended. And it reaches completion when you understand that the goal isn't to replace the herd's opinions with your own fixed beliefs, but to develop the capacity for ongoing inquiry, perpetual questioning, and the humility to follow evidence wherever it leads. Are you ready to discover what your own mind sounds like when it's finally free to speak? The deepest revelation in Schopenhauer's philosophy arrives like a thunderbolt that illuminates everything we've explored and transforms it into something entirely unexpected. The ultimate act of rebellion against the herd mind is not the assertion of individual will, but the recognition of universal suffering, and from that recognition, the birth of genuine compassion. This is the paradigm shift that redefines everything. Throughout our journey, we've been operating under the assumption that breaking free from the herd means becoming more individualistic, more separate, more alone. But Schopenhauer discovered something far more profound and paradoxical. True freedom from the herd comes not from isolation, but from a deeper connection to the fundamental reality that underlies all existence, the reality of suffering. Here's the revelation that will haunt you. Every person caught in the herd mind, every individual mindlessly echoing collective opinions, every soul trapped in borrowed thoughts and manufactured desires, they are not your enemies. They are fellow prisoners in the same existential predicament. The herd mind doesn't just destroy reason. It destroys our capacity to see others as they truly are. Vulnerable beings struggling with the same blind will, the same desperate need for meaning, the same terror of isolation that drives us all. Schopenhauer understood that at the heart of life lies suffering not as a pessimistic observation, but as a doorway to liberation. The blind will that drives us, the herd that shapes us, the illusions that comfort us, all of these emerge from the same source: our inability to face the fundamental difficulty of existence. Most people, he argued, refuse to confront this truth directly. Instead, they escape into distractions, into the safety of collective delusions where shared illusions shield them from uncomfortable realities. But here's where everything transforms. When you finally step outside the herd's warm embrace, when you endure the cold winds of independent thought, when you face reality without the buffer of collective comfort, you don't discover your superiority over the masses. You discover your profound kinship with them. The very suffering that drove them into the herd's arms is the same suffering that drives your desperate search for authentic understanding. This recognition births what Schopenhauer considered the only true moral foundation: compassion. Not the shallow empathy promoted by social movements, not the performative caring demanded by political correctness, but something far deeper: the direct, visceral understanding that the person next to you experiences the same existential predicament that you do. They suffer as you suffer. They search for meaning as you search. They fear isolation, meaninglessness, and death just as intensely as you do. The herd mind destroys this compassion because it reduces individuals to categories, labels, and roles. It teaches us to see others not as fellow conscious beings struggling with existence, but as representatives of ideologies, members of opposing tribes, obstacles to our group's victory. Mass opinion dehumanizes by design. It must, because genuine human connection would make the herd's simplified narratives impossible to maintain. But the individual who breaks free from the herd's gravitational pull sees through these illusions. They recognize themselves in the suffering of others, and from this recognition grows a morality that cannot be shaken by majority opinion, cannot be corrupted by tribal loyalties, cannot be manipulated by appeals to group identity. This is moral reasoning in its purest form, not following rules imposed by authority, but acting from the direct perception of shared vulnerability. Consider how this transforms everything. Instead of feeling superior to those still trapped in herd thinking, you feel a profound sadness for their imprisonment and a recognition that you too were once, and may still sometimes be, trapped in the same prison. Instead of arguing with them to prove your intellectual superiority, you speak truth gently, knowing that their resistance comes from fear, not stupidity. Instead of withdrawing into bitter isolation, you engage with the world from a place of understanding that few can access. This is why Schopenhauer's philosophy is simultaneously the most pessimistic and the most compassionate worldview ever developed. It strips away every comfortable illusion about progress, about human nature, about the meaning of existence, but in doing so, it reveals the one thing that makes life worth living: our capacity to recognize suffering and respond with genuine care. The ultimate truth is this: resisting the herd mind is not about thinking differently, it's about becoming capable of authentic love. The person who can see through collective delusions, who can stand alone with reason, who can endure misunderstanding and rejection, this person develops the rarest and most valuable capacity in human existence: the ability to see others as they truly are, beyond all social masks and tribal identities, as conscious beings deserving of compassion simply because they exist and suffer. Imagine a world where more individuals achieve this recognition. Imagine politics without tribal hatred, because the participants could see their opponents as fellow humans caught in the same struggle. Imagine cultures without dehumanizing narratives, because enough people had developed the inner strength to resist collective hatred. Imagine relationships based not on shared opinions, but on mutual recognition of shared vulnerability. This vision may seem impossibly distant, but it begins with a single choice: your choice. Right now, in this moment, you can decide whether you will remain an echo of the herd or become a voice of authentic compassion. You can choose whether your mind will be a vessel for borrowed thoughts or a source of genuine understanding. You can decide whether you will see others through the lens of collective prejudice or through the clarity of individual recognition. Schopenhauer's final warning echoes through the centuries. If reason is destroyed by the herd, then individuals lose not only truth, but also the very possibility of authentic life. But his promise echoes just as strongly: the individual who dares to resist, who dares to confront suffering and embrace compassion, can rise above the illusions of the crowd and touch something deeper, something more real than any collective comfort could provide. The question that will define the rest of your life is simple but profound. Will you be a voice, or will you be an echo? Will you think, or will you repeat? Will you love, or will you merely belong? Your answer doesn't just shape your own existence, it shapes the world we all inhabit. In an age of mass delusion, every individual who chooses authentic thought and genuine compassion becomes a beacon of hope for human consciousness itself. The choice is yours. The time is now. What will you choose?